Hi, everyone, and welcome to ABC's Anesthesia. Today we have a sustainability episode with Dr. Maro. Now, Maro, we met up in Darwin when we were doing a presentation. I was just enthralled by your presentation of sustainability because it was just such a different angle, and it actually answered a lot of the questions that I think a lot of people might think. And like you went into some controversial things, and I think that was the beauty of it, that you weren't afraid to just talk very candidly about your experience. So I thought, hey, I really want to publicize that as much as I can with ABC's Anesthesia. A little bit about yourself. So you're a FANSCA, you recently graduated, which is great because you're already getting into stuff, even though you became a FANSCA in February this year, and being invited to present at conferences. So you're the sustainability lead for your hospital up in Darwin. Also, you're recently become an exec member for the ANSCA Environmental Sustainability Network. So I'm so glad about that, because that means that you will be able to affect change through a really amazing organization like ANSCA. And you're one of the Doctors for Environment Australia member, and that's on your shirt there as well.
Let's give a little shout out to them.
Well, welcome, Maro. Like, we were so fortunate to meet you, and I'm so glad to have you on the podcast.
Great, thanks. So good to see you again.
Yeah, you too. Hey, so just to get started, how did you get involved in this space?
Look, that's a bit of a funny story. I don't really have a dramatic story like some of my colleagues who, did some aid work in Africa and see the children dying and stuff like that. My one is more of when I was first year age, I feel like New South Wales as a whole. Well, I shouldn't speak for all of New South Wales, but based on my experiences where I trained and where I started. There wasn't a lot of TB usage. Most of the TB usage I've seen was from locums who had just finished, just got their FANSCA. And I remember thinking, wow, that's kind of a cool technique that not a lot of people do. And then I started seeing how the patients wake up, and I'm like, wow, this is such a great anesthetic. Why don't people do it more? And I remember thinking, because everyone does TB so differently and everyone has their own style, I was like, you know what? I really want to get good at this. And then I made it a mission to just see if I can TB as much as possible as soon as I finished, became a BT2. And then, you start to hear about how it's good for the patient, but it's also good for the environment. And then it becomes like a bit of a rabbit hole, like an inception. You get an idea planted in your mind, it just grows and grows and bigger. And then you start to see just waste everywhere. And then it just kind of spiraled out of control. And here I am. So they used to call me Greta at my old hospital, Liverpool Hospital. So
we're back to Greta Thunberg?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. That's really interesting. Hey, so maybe even to start, like, what is what's the emergency? Why do we have to do this right now? Why is it so important?
Yeah. So look, I think the common thing I hear all the time is that climate change is natural. We had ice ages before, and we had hot days before, as seen by the great movie Ice Age. It's a great movie, by the way, if you haven't seen it. But the question is, climate change is natural, so why do we even bother? This comes in cycles, and crocodiles used to once roam, where the iceberg used to be. And just going back briefly on the science, basically, climate change typically happens over, tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of years, mainly due to the Earth's orbit around the sun, and the tilt, and the wobble, and other factors here and there. But overall, it happens over tens of thousands of years. Instead of hundreds of years like it's occurring now. And basically, it doesn't give time for all the things on the living beings on the planet to adapt fast enough, and a lot of species will die out. And the other thing is, obviously we're in a first world country, so if the climate change would get worse, we're probably going to be better off because we have the resources and technology to deal with it. But it's usually the poorest people that contribute the least. So the poorest countries that contribute the least amount of CO2 are going to suffer the most, because their whole livelihood is dependent on agriculture and things like that. They get one bad season and then their family is wiped out. So I think we have an ethical obligation to try to fix this mess. And, we also have the potential to do it before it gets worse. And the reason why it's such an urgency is that, we all talk about the point of no return. And the idea is that there's, gigatons of methane stuck in the icebergs, and as they melt, they'll start to release, and we could potentially go into like a vicious cycle of no return. So yeah, it is an ethical obligation. And also, I think if you're a technology person, it's quite an exciting time to be involved and also try our best to do our part for the planet and the future.
Okay. Hey, there's an interesting thing in terms of the Milankovitch cycles. Could you just briefly talk about that? It is not something I heard until your presentation.
Yeah, so look, just a disclaimer, I'm not a climate scientist. This is all just based on my study online, online, I say. But, we have known about the length cycle for a very long time, even climate change and how greenhouse gases, we have known that for quite a long time, for hundreds of years at least, I think. And, the molecular cycle, I think it was in the early 19th, the early 20th century, maybe late 19th century. I have to look it up just to get the data, but basically, there's three things. So, it's the way the sun and the earth rotates around the sun. And it's not a perfect circle, and it's a bit of an oval. And then that also changes over time and the distance away from the sun. So the closer you are to the sun, the more sunlight you get. The more away from the sun, the less sunlight you get. The earth also doesn't rotate completely parallel, so it has a little bit of a tilt to it, and also a little bit of wobble. And basically, it's all related to the amount of sunlight the Earth gets over time. And then with less sunlight, you get more ice sheets. And then that also kind of creates like a positive feedback loop where the ice sheets reflect the sunlight back, so that less energy gets absorbed in Earth over time. And then it gets cooling, and eventually Earth gets closer, and the ice sheets start melting, and then get more positive feedback, more energy gets trapped in Earth's atmosphere, and then the Earth starts to warm again. And so this process is happening over, a very long time, at least tens of thousands of years, not like the hundreds of years that's going right now.
And just to clarify that, so you've got variations in the way the Earth rotates around the sun through multiple different axes and shift and wobble, and you have less sun, more ice, and more sunlight reflected, so it gets colder. So you get less sun on multiple fronts, makes things colder, more sun, decreases ice, decreases sunlight reflected, and it should get warmer.
Correct.
Very obvious, but it's done more so than you'd think.
Yes. And then, there are other things that affect like solar fluctuations and things like that, but molecular cycle is the broad thing that affects it over the time.
We should be getting cooler now, but we're not. And that's a very part of the convincing science of why this is climate change and the Earth is getting warmer, in spite of these cycles are happening over, climate change happens over thousands of years, not the recorded human history.
Yes, correct. So, if the rate we're going now, the planet will always be here. I'm sure eventually if all species get wiped out, it'll get cooler and colder like it used to tens of thousands of years. But it should not be happening over a few hundred years, because that's not good for anyone, including human beings.
Yeah, okay. Hey, so that's a bit of the, I think most people know about the greenhouse effect and how that increases temperature. How, can you talk about the point of no return, and where we're at with that? This sounds really scary, doesn't it? Point of no return.
Yeah, so it's, I really should have had my friend who's a climate scientist here, and she could help explain this a lot better. But I think the idea is that basically, as we all know that the ice falls melting and they're retreating, so there's less sunlight being reflected. That also has a lot of other effects. So increasing temperature overall means more water trapped in the air, and that also acts as a bit of a greenhouse gas itself. And then the other word some people may have heard of is the permafrost. So these ice are just permanently melted throughout the whole year. And they hold crazy amounts of methane and CO2. So I think at the moment I read that we have about 3,300 gigatons of CO2 in the atmosphere, but permafrost, if all that was melted, they have about 1,700 gigatons. So about half of the greenhouse gas in the atmosphere right now will be released. More CO2 gets released, more heat gets trapped, more global warming. Obviously it's not going to all melt at the same time, but so it's going to make it harder and harder, and it's just only going to accelerate from now. Yeah,
okay. So actually, this is probably a good point. Many of the people who are listening to this are going to be junior doctors or doctors. So a real plug for doctors for the environment Australia. So please have a look at their website. There's lots of good information. Join them if you can, to try and support trying to have more sustainable workplaces and even just the little things we can do as doctors to try and make things better. The other thing that we've launched via ABC's Anesthesia is Future Anesthesia. So yeah, check out the Instagram page, Future Anesthesia. There's just lots and lots of useful information there on how we can do practical things to try to make things better. And also feel free to send us an email at abcanesthesia@gmail.com if you want to be part of future anesthesia to try and spread the voices of good people in the space who are promoting things that are going to make things more sustainable in the future. So yeah, Doctors for Environment Australia and Future Anesthesia, please check those out. So
yeah, just a quick plug for Doctors for Environment Australia, and these are the organizations like Future Anesthesia. So I think, with a lot of these good effects, people want to see retail, like planting more trees, and they want to see visual outcome. But the really big changes happen at wholesale, like legal battles and big policy changes. So I think it's good for all of us to be involved and also support them if we can, to make the bigger change, as well as doing some smaller changes in our lives and our environment around us to really have an impact.
Yeah, great. I like the idea of, it's not all just doom and gloom. Like I like that we can just say things that make a massive effect and that are really useful. That just the actionable things that we can do. If there's just a few things that you think are the highest yield type things that we could do on an individual level, what do you think those might be?
Yeah, so look, I think reality is it's very hard to pinpoint one thing, because I think people always have this all or nothing mindset. And then they also have things like, oh, these fossil fuels, a company can pump out all these fossil fuels and I can't have plastic straws. And, people always lament on this fact. But I think in terms of, we should always encourage any little bit of action that is good. So even things like being vegetarian, if you're vegetarian 99% of the time, but you eat meat 1% of the time in your life, then you're not a vegetarian. Now, that's why I don't necessarily like the term vegetarian from the sustainability point of view, because we should be doing actions that are sustainable. So there's no point going vegetarian and vegan if you can't sustain it. So, even having vegetarian meals 2-3 times a week is better than not having vegetarian meal, just from the climate point of view. Now, in terms of what we can do individually, obviously, if you are in a fortunate position to have a bit of finances, trying to electrify everything in the house, so putting more solar on, putting more battery, getting an electric vehicle, because I think about 80% of the Australia's CO2 emissions can be reduced by electrifying everything. And the other thing is agriculture and things like that, aviation. Those are going to be the hardest to beat. But also like to give a little shout out for a book by climate scientists recommended to me. It's called The Quarterly Essay, Getting to Zero by Alan Finkel. And Alan Finkel is the former chief scientist of Australia. And he's actually got some practical information about how to reduce our CO2 and also our plan for Australia to get to net zero and how feasible it is. Very interesting book. But I think electrifying everything if you've got the resources to do so, getting big solar panels, big batteries, and then obviously have the mindset. It's people always complain about lack of recycling in hospital, but it should be reduced. So not use them in the first place and then reuse and then recycle. So just, overall, we're in a very consumerist society. And we should try to reduce the amount of things that we have to buy or use in the first place. And I think that's the best thing we can do as a habit. And then that will also inspire others to change when you do that and other people see what you're doing.
I think that's one of the biggest things I took away from your talk, that you feel bad about not being 100% something. But if you're 90% something, that's great. Even if you're 50% vegetarian, for example, that's really great. Can you show that article again, or that paper?
Oh, yes, sorry. It's the Quarterly Essay, Getting to Zero, Australia's
looking on YouTube. There you go.
Yes. Actually, so my class science friend recommended me 3 books. I've only read one so far, but this is the other one.
The Big Switch.
The Big Switch.
Excellent, by Saul Griffith. Excellent.
Yeah. And then Collapse, How Society Shifts the Veil, or...
Oh, Jared Diamond. He's one of my favorites.
Yeah. It's a really good book too, actually.
The chimpanzee.
Yeah.
that
looks at how past societies succeed and fail, and a lot of it was related to resource depletion and not managing resources and less arable land and things like that. Very interesting books.
Yeah, great. So that's great. We'll chuck those in. I'll put that in the show notes just so if people want to read a bit more in depth, they can do that. So electrify as much as you can. Go vegetarian as much as you can. Reduce things as much as you can. And this is such a big thing where, like, being in a consumerist world where you're on Instagram and there's always some really interesting thing that I find interesting from minute from Temu that I feel like buying, but really it's not be great at all. I had a friend who
Yeah.
go on to like buy all her new clothes from swap meets or
Yeah.
like a Facebook page where you have these really old but authentic items that you would swap, and like she had great sense of fashion. It was always secondhand and just well made, and it's just, such a great thing that she would do.
Yeah, well, that's the other thing. Buy things that last. If you're gonna buy something, also I buy most of my things secondhand because first of all they're much cheaper, and you can buy really good quality things for cheaper. But also, you're not trying to participate in the consumer society, or you try to minimize it at the very least. Because reality is, we all do need stuff every now and then. But also don't be ashamed that we're not perfect. Because it never ends. Initially, they'll ask me, do I have an electric car? And if I say I have an electric car, then it's like, do you drive? Say, well, I do drive. And they go, oh, why aren't you riding a bike? And then they ask me, are you vegetarian? And if I say yes, then are you a vegan? And, it kind of never ends. Do you go overseas? Do you have pets? Do you kiss? And it comes to the point, it's like, why are you even alive? So, I'm fighting for humanity and well-being. So, I'm not promoting everyone should off themselves to save the planet, right? So, let's not, don't be ashamed, and then just do the best you can, I think is the message.
Maybe that's the thing. Like a lot of the time you feel bad about not doing everything. So it makes you almost just want to put your blinkers on and put your head in the sand about something, but to just go, hey, I'm not perfect. I'm going to bring my keep cup as much as I remember and I can. I'm going to eat vegetarian as much as I can. And hey, if I want to do an overseas trip, you can't become a recluse from life. Like you have to participate in life as well. Really interesting book that I read recently was The Let Them Theory. Like it just kept coming up on Audible. And one of the things you actually can't change someone else's behavior. You can't force that. It has to come from within. But the one thing evidence-based that does work is role modeling. Like if you want to actually change your behavior, surround yourself with images or people who have the behavior you want to have, and you will innately want to do that. Like I live in a part of town where everyone's fit and running. It makes me want to be a fitter person. And in my hospital, everyone uses keep cups. It really made me change to that based on really good role modeling rather than being kind of put to shame, I guess.
That's right. Oh, and I guess I like to say, as doctors, we always, there's a lot of passionate people, and not just for sustainability, but just a lot of things. I'm sure we want to make the place better often. And we all kind of get very disappointed because we try to do something and then we make a change and then the change doesn't last. And I think the important thing is we need a system so that we can support these changes to be long lasting. And that comes as obviously culture change, but a bit of governance as well. So things like if you don't have a sustainability lead, you should really get a sustainability lead for the hospital, at least for the anesthetic department. And regular education sessions because people come and go, and that's just the nature of a working environment. And I think that's one of the best ways to make something continue ongoing. Regular audits, education, and then making changes and change the overall culture, and then we'll just eventually become self-sustaining, hopefully.
Yeah, that's great. Hey, so if you're listening to this, if there isn't a sustainability lead, whether it's in your department, whether you're anesthetics or another department, if there isn't a junior doctor group in your hospital which has some kind of sustainability arm, just create it. Just make it part of the system. And that's something you can easily do. And for your invested interest, that sounds really great on a CV if you're going for applications. So please be part of that journey. I don't care what your motive is, as long as the action is a good action. So, yeah.
That's right. And like I say, it's good for your CV. And also, funny enough, people respect the titles a bit more. So, even if you're so-called self-proclaimed sustainability lead for the anesthetic department, people will kind of respect their title a bit more. So I think, you should use it for your CV, but also to get your message across and also be a bit more, people take it on board because, the common thing is, I'm just a medical student, I'm just an intern, I'm just a resident, I'm just a registrar, I'm just a first year consultant, where do you stop? I think, just use your title and then spread the message because, most people want to do the right thing too.
Some of the things that were really new to me when I came to my hospital, which I think is a leader in sustainability, that's Western Health in Victoria and Melbourne. We used to have our drugs in a sterile pack, but as soon as I came to Western Health, it was in these reusable green trays. And it blew my mind. I thought, oh, hold on, it should be a sterile pack, but when you think about it, it just doesn't. As long as you're protecting key parts and key sites on your, on your drug vials or on your syringes, that's exactly how it needs to be. So I wasn't really questioning these things. We also stopped using blueies for things that don't need blueies for. So we just use towels instead, again, which are reusable, that don't fill up landfill. And we've taken desflurane away from, you just can't get it anymore in our hospital. So those three, and also we're using silicone tourniquets, so they're not disposable, and they're easy to wipe down and clean. So they're infectious disease safe, and we don't have these extraordinary packs for doing simple things like IV cannulas. Again, we have a reusable green tray in anesthetics, and we just protect each thing by opening the cannula in its packaging. So it's, again, protected from a sterility point of view.
Yeah. And this is why culture is so important, because you have that culture where everyone's trying to introduce changes and maintain these things. And also it's kind of become the norm to use that there. Because I remember thinking when I was junior registrar, we had those Cortex prep sticks for spinal. And I don't know, it's just like a thing to use it twice. You open up one, use it again, and then before you do it, you open up another one and prep again. And I always thought, it's the same chemical, it's either sterile or it's not sterile. Doing it two doesn't make it more sterile. So I actually even got to the point of getting in touch with the company rep and asking, do I need to do it twice? And even they said it once. But a lot of other registrars are still like, oh, no, I'll have to do it twice. So I think having that culture where everyone is doing it, then it makes you a bit more open to change, if everyone is doing it, then you become part of the law. And also once you see it in some place out, you can go spread it in other places. And also as a consultant, you can show the registrar that it's okay to do something they haven't seen before. Within reason. Yeah.
That's great. Hey, let's move on to trees and carbon capture. Like there's a lot of those carbon neutral initiatives. Is that realistic? How does that work?
Yeah. So look, it's one of those funny things that a lot of companies can claim to be carbon neutral. And then there's a bit of confusion with the term carbon neutral and net zero. So the net zero should be that your greenhouse emissions is minus reductions of your CO2 minus removal. So what you're actually removing, it should be overall you're outputting zero carbon emissions into the atmosphere. And that's how you get to net zero. Now, carbon neutral is companies can produce as much CO2 as they want. And then, they can have not much reduction, but they can pay for offsets. So you can pay another company or you can pay some other organization, whether, for example, they might be planting trees, they might be putting solar panels on the roof of some places. And then because that's offsetting the carbon from the environment, okay, I can say, look, I've actually offset my emissions. So it sounds good in theory. Now, the problem is that the offsets are, often hard to verify. Is the one problem. Does a project actually have a reputable third-party certification? The other thing is, does a project actually sequester? Is this from an addition to something they're going to do anyway? So if they're going to already put solar panels, when you just pay for the solar panels, but instead of them paying for it, then you haven't actually added any more extra solar panels to the system. So you haven't actually added anything to the project. And the other thing is permanence. So this is where the trees come in. So how long is the project going to last? And, is it going to be a long-term thing? And for the tree to have an offset, they have to stay as trees permanently. Because if you plant a tree and you cut them down and you burn it off again, then you're just putting it back into the atmosphere. So because of those things that, unfortunately carbon neutral is a bit questionable. Now, obviously it is probably still a good thing to put money into these things, but I think it's offering a company a way out with reducing their actual emissions and claiming that they're carbon neutral. So, I'm not entirely against it, but I think, you can, I even find planes, for example, you pay $3 and you offset your emissions flying from down to Sydney. I mean, that sounds very ridiculous. You can do it with $3. So, I think it's definitely a bit realistic about what we actually try to achieve here.
It did feel a little bit too good to be true. Hold on. So I'm without any place if I just and to think, oh, actually, hold on, it's got to be trees where there wouldn't have been trees anyway, and they need to stay trees forever, and that you're still doing something. So yeah, it's not bad. It's part of a larger picture, but it's a small part. It shouldn't negate all the things that you need to do outside of that as well.
Correct. Yeah. So, as companies should be really trying to reduce their CO2 emissions, is the main thing, rather than trying to just offset their carbon by putting money in some other places.
Incredible. Hey, there's this thing called direct air capture technology. Then what are your thoughts on that? So you give us a quick summary of what that actually is, and is this a solution?
Yeah. So, it's basically direct air capture. It's kind of one of the things that people always talk about. And, eventually, once we emit the CO2 in the air, it's kind of staying there for a very long time. So even if we get to net zero, like let's say we net zero right now, we aren't putting any more CO2 in the air, we will still need to now sequester get that carbon from the atmosphere and basically take it out of the atmosphere, whether it's with trees. And the other thing people talk about is direct air capture. So they got these big machines where they suck the atmospheric air and then they capture the carbon and then they store it deep underground. So then you're taking carbon from the atmosphere. Now, the problem is, it's like trying to, imagine you've got a bathtub and you're just pumping water into it and you're trying to suck it out with the straw. So that's kind of how much carbon, it's probably even less than that. So the biggest carbon capture site in the world at the moment is in Iceland. It's called Mavus, completed in 2024, I think. And they capture about 36,000 tons of CO2 a year, which sounds like a lot, but the world's CO2 emissions are 1,000 tons a second. And CO2 emissions of Australia is over 50,000 tons an hour. So basically 1 year of the biggest carbon capture site in the world is not even enough to capture 1 hour of Australian emissions. So, they do have a role, but it's just not a realistic solution. And it's only once you get to net zero. So they're incredibly expensive. And also they're quite inefficient. As you can imagine, the atmospheric CO2, we know it's like 0.04% or something. So, it's much easier to prevent the milk getting added to the tea rather than trying to separate the milk from the tea once it's added. Is kind of another analogy I heard. Where it could help is maybe in sites of heavy emissions, the things that we can't get rid of, like manufacturing, then maybe direct air capture from those areas, because then, I think CO2 concentration much higher, like 20%. But overall, in terms of just sucking it from the atmosphere, is pretty hard to sell and it's very expensive. So it's only once you get to net zero.
Yeah, okay. Let's go with a couple of the controversies. So there was maybe not recently, but a few years ago, a paper, I think written by an anaesthetist, saying that desperate is actually not so bad. Yeah, it'd be great to get a comment on that.
Yes, so this was a paper published in, I think, 2023, like November. And it was written by a climate scientist, Slinger, in UK, and her daughter is also, who's an anesthetist. And I think it was called The Science of Climate Change and the Effect of Domestic Gas Emissions. And one of the, either November 2023 or maybe March 2024, I can't quite recall top of my head, but it was saying that desperate is actually, the way we're doing the greenhouse effect of volatiles is wrong. And that's because it depends on the persistency and the atmospheric concentration for a gas to have a greenhouse effect. And then, they had a lot of these articles. And again, I'm not claiming to be a climate scientist, but I read through that paper and I read through the response, which interestingly was also written by Forbes and others. So, a great Australian healthcare sustainability scientist / anaesthetist.
Yep.
And if you look at the paper, their argument, that in their response to the paper, they actually say desperate is the only volatile that lived long enough to actually have a greenhouse gas effect. But then the problem is there's just not enough atmospheric abundance. Now, to that, I asked the question, I wonder what the desperate concentration was like 20, 30 years ago, when it was maybe 20 years ago, when it was, arguably the main volatile in use at the time. And, we made quite an incredible push to phase it out almost completely. Like, I can't remember the last time I see someone using desperate now, which is very different to when I started training. So that would be an interesting point. And the other thing is, out of all the other volatiles out there, so there's desflurane, SIBO, and isoflurane in first world countries, mainly des and SIBO really, but isoflurane depletes the ozone layer, so that's already not good anyway. And out of the des and SIBO uses much less concentration. So even if you take aside the environmental point of view, there is not much reason to use des from an economical point of view. and also patient outcome. And there's no evidence that desperate has any impact on patient outcomes, other than a slightly faster wake up, which doesn't correlate to better patient outcome. And if you if you really want to be nitpicky, if you look at the production cost of desperate versus SIBO and MAC hour, so there was another paper that looked at the life cycle analysis of SIBO and desperate. And just because you're using so much more, desperate just contributes so much more in terms of CO2 costs in manufacturing. So even if you completely ignore that let's just say desperate doesn't cause any global warming, then even just the point of CO2 production resulting from manufacturing, desperate is still much worse than SIBO4A. The other thing is it doesn't take into account that desperate needed a heat and vaporizer, so it's constantly consuming electricity is the other thing.
Yes.
It's kind of funny, that paper, because a lot of people have sent me that paper, and, there's all these other papers that say desperate is bad. And, we got one paper that says desperate, it's actually not bad and you should use it. And I kind of think, well, I think if you actually dig a bit deeper, even if you just count the manufacturing, it's still bad. It's still much more costly for the hospital. And sustainability isn't just about the environment. It's also about, making things sustainable, and that includes finances. So I think even from that point of view alone, I just don't think there's much reason to attach to it.
Yeah, okay.
Say attached to it.
Great. So very convincing that even if you take some simple aspects of production of desperate and just the percentage that you need, it's already a long way worse, if not even accounting for the greenhouse effect of desperate.
Right. And interestingly, so in 2021, the Slingos, they actually had a news article on The Guardian talking about anesthetic gas and putting the climate effects of anesthetic gas into perspective. And the 3 questions they asked was, are there clinical benefits to the patient? Are there economic benefits to the NHS? Are there wider environmental benefits? Now, question 1 and 2, we can definitively say, no, there's no clinical benefit to the patient. There's no economical benefit. Number 3, that's where you could argue it's a bit questionable, but I think based on the evidence, number 3 is that, there are environmental benefits of other volatiles against desperate. So I think even in the own 3 questions, I could confidently answer that desperate is the worst out of all of them.
Yeah, okay. Hey, can I ask you, we're going to switch over to fresh gas from Tiva. Before I ask you about the optimal fresh gas flow level, do you use Tiva for every case, and which cases would you use volatile for?
So that's always the question I ask the registrars, because I'm kind of seen as this religious Tiva zealot.
Yep.
And I actually say, look, there are some hard evidence-based situations where you should use volatile, and then there are some moderate ones and soft ones. And I kind of make it almost like a part 2. But I think the one time you should use SIBO is that if they had anaphylaxis under anesthesia, but then it's urgent surgery, so that you don't have time to test. It'll take at least 4 to 6 weeks before the IgE becomes significant enough to properly test positive and get false negative. So then you can't assume that they didn't have anaphylaxis to propofol. So in that case, you would use the least anaphylactic anesthesia, which is volatiles, and also the anesthetic you haven't used last time, and it'd pretty much be induced everyone was propofol, so you shouldn't run much infusions. So I think that's like a true hard evidence case of using volatile instead of Tiva. The other thing,
what would you induce? Sorry. What do you induce them with? Are they then getting an inhalational induction, or?
Oh, well, I think then, it's probably unlikely that they're going to be allergic to thiopentone. You probably use propofol last time, so I'll probably use thiopentone, or even ketamine, I suppose, is kind of what I would do, I think.
Yeah.
And then the other time is maybe, people will talk about, so I should talk about the other hard evidence. Well, it's not really hard evidence, but maybe like mitochondrial disease. There's some question about increased risk of peripheral infusion syndrome. It's very unclear. So I'll say it's more like a moderate indication. Oftentimes you look up these strange cases online on orphan anesthesia, and they like Tiva has been trialed successfully in the past. So it's a bit unclear as to whether they're safe or not, but to be err on the side of caution, it's probably not unreasonable to use volatiles. And then the bronchospasm, I think, is a moderate indication. I wouldn't use it first up unless they actually had bronchospasm, because I find that if I need gas to get out of bronchospasm, and then when I'm extubating at the end, they often become bronchospastic again. So I really try hard to avoid gas, but that's a moderate indication to get you out of trouble. And then the other one that I read in the Oxford Handbook of Anesthesia was that, in non-obstetric surgery in pregnant patients, you actually do want the uterine relaxation and maybe reduce risk of preterm labor. I don't think there's any evidence to suggest that. It's more theoretical, but I think you can make the argument. Also, SIBO doesn't cross the placenta, things like that, even though we know profile's pretty safe. So that's another soft indication. And I reckon those are kind of what I would consider using volatiles for.
Yeah, sounds good. And so moving on then to fresh gas flow, what is the optimal fresh gas flow in TIVO?
Yeah, so this is a funny one. It's actually an Australian paper as well. See, there's a lot of good research coming from Australia. We're like, we're out there in healthcare sustainability research. So if you want to be involved and you want to make a name for yourself, time is right. Anyway, so in terms of fresh gas flow, so I hear it debated all the time. Now, the paper was done in Concord, I think. It was years of fellow at the time, I think, or maybe, I think you know him personally, don't you? No, it was George. So I think he was on the WhatsApp group chat. Anyway, so he published that paper and he looked at the CO2 cost of manufacturing oxygen and air and the CO2 cost of manufacturing soda lime. And then he did a trial because the idea is that the higher fresh gas flow you do, the less soda lime you consume because the CO2 is being flushed out rather than going through the soda lime. So you significantly increase the soda lime usage. So there's kind of got to be a point somewhere where it's balanced. So he found that at 6 liters at 30% FiO2 was it didn't actually say it was environmentally better. It was actually CO2 equivalent. So there wasn't more CO2 produced because you're saving on soda lime usage, but you also consume oxygen. But I think you save about $1.80 or $1.50 an hour or something like that. And if you think about it, if you save $1.80 per hour or $1.50 per hour, it doesn't sound like a big deal. But if you got 10 theaters, that's $15 an hour. You times it by 8 for 8 hours, and you times it by 300 days a year or even longer. And then now you're talking tens of thousands of dollars. So that's probably one of the most influential papers for TIVO practice because I see everyone running high flow now. Now the question is, there was another response to the paper saying that he actually might have done the bit optimistic calculation of the oxygen and air production. And, also most people don't run 30% FiO2. Most people run 40, 50, maybe even higher. So then, the question is it still 6 liters? Now, this is my opinion. I think there's a balance. There's got to be a point where, CO2 emissions and plastic waste. So even though the CO2 cost of producing more soda lime might be slightly higher, even the CO2 cost of running high oxygen air might be slightly higher. I think because you're saving so much plastic use, it makes it worthwhile. And if you look at the graph in the paper, there is a CO2 absorbent exhaustion time on the y-axis, and then there's a fresh gas flow. And as fresh gas flow increases, your CO2 exhaustion times is like an exponential curve, and that kind of starts around 5.5 liters. So at 6 liters, I think you're looking at about 200, 300 hours of soda lime usage. At 4 liters, you're looking at less than 50. So, you're saving at least 5 soda lime for every one, probably more. So I think that plastic waste accounts into that. Without, the CO2 emissions might be slightly higher, but I don't think that's a big deal. And it's only going to get better with increasing renewable energy. And I think if people are really worried about oxygen usage, they should try to use less high flow. And when they do use high flow, they should reduce the flow rate to maybe 20 or 30. Because if you're running at 20 liters instead of 40, remember that's 100% oxygen. So just by reducing it 20 liters or 10 liters, let's say you reduce by 10 liters, that's like 20 liters fresh gas flow at 50% on the ventilator machine. So you can just see the scale change. And I think when people get so focused on the fresh gas flow and the TIVO, but I think the real oxygen reduction comes from outside. But also, don't forget there are clinical benefits to running 6 liters. I think it makes your anesthetic probably a little bit safer, not by much, but it makes it easier because when you change oxygen concentration, it changes rapidly. If there's a leak, you can tolerate a much more significant leak. And honestly, I always run 6 liters, and it's hard to remember the last time I had to change soda lime as well. So I think overall it makes your anesthetic easier. So I think make the anesthetic easier, environmentally, CO2, maybe slightly worse, but soda lime, you save so much more plastic. So it's only going to get better with renewable energy as well. So I personally run 6 liters, and I think that's what we should be running. But that's just my opinion based on the data.
But that's a good little balance that, first of all, it's these are small gains. So, we're thinking about, but not obsessing over it. It is complex. So running at 6 liters with less than 50% FiO2 is a reasonable compromise where we don't know all the data, but we know that we're not changing soda lime with its costs, and the small increase in the amount of oxygen we're using probably is accounted by the fact that we're not replacing soda lime. Is that kind of a good summary there?
Yes, and I think they looked at like using UK energy data. They use a lot more renewables in Australia and US, and they found that your savings are so much more in UK and America. So I imagine Australia is actually rapidly decarbonizing from an electrical point of view. We are only like 15% renewables like 5 years ago, and now we're almost 40%. So we are rapidly increasing, and we are on track to reach 80% renewable energy by 2030, which is, a positive news. So that's only going to get better. So I still think 6 liters is going to be the way to go. And, it just makes everything easier as well. So yeah, save on that, all that plastic. Because the other thing people complain about, oh, TiVo uses so much syringes, so much plastic. Well, I think soda lime is a lot of plastic. So that could at least offset the plastic use in TiVo.
Yeah, that's great. So actually, I like this little table you've got in your presentation, which just to recap a few things: refuse to use stuff. So just don't buy that thing on Temu, please. You don't need it. Use whatever you're using, reuse things, repurpose, and finally recycle. So the most desirable thing is refuse, then reduce, reuse, repurpose, recycle. Which this is. I think a lot of anesthetists have a certain MacGyver-esque part of them, like they. We want to make contraptions that work for us. We're constantly, tinkering with our workspaces or the way we do things. So, I think this really is part of our personality to do this kind of stuff. So just from that, TiVo in general, fresh gas flows around 6 liters, less than 50%. Bluey's terrible. Using, reducing the amount of stuff that you're using. And disposable things. So reusable things are just always going to be better than anything that's replaceable or disposable.
Yeah, and great paper by Forbes again. He's done reusable airway equipment versus disposable, and I think a 6-state hospital was saving about $30,000 a year just from having reusable airway equipment, and the environmental cost was also a lot less. And like I say, it's only going to get better with more renewable energy in Australia. The other pet peeve of mine is like the 10 ml saline ampoules. We have a whole liter bag that you're giving to patients. I mean, if you really thought they were incompatible, like with Hartmann, you shouldn't be giving the drug in the Hartmann line anyway. So I pretty much dilute all of my drugs with Hartmann as well. And then you never have to use those 10 ml ampoules as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, the side point that we briefly touched on is if you want to get involved in this, just prove a saving of money to the hospital. And often these principles save money. It's refusing, it's reducing, it's repurposing, it's reusing. So if you can save the hospital money, you're saving the planet, just secondarily, but also the hospital administration will be jumping on that. So, this is about having that sustainability lead, getting a collective effort. I think you've got here on your slide, collective effort, leadership involvement, governance, culture of sustainability, having measurable outcomes and standards, and lots of encouragement, even for the little wins. It probably goes well to the sustainability or SUSQI, so sustainability and quality improvement. What's that about?
Yeah, so SUSQI is kind of becoming a big thing. And the idea is, we already have a quality improvement assurance processes for a lot of things like patient safety, hospital efficiency, patient-centered things, and all those things. We already are auditing, we already have set of standards, and we're constantly checking to make sure that we're meeting the correct standards and also trying to get better at them. So the idea of SUSQI is that using the system we already have, we can incorporate sustainability into the puzzle, because sustainability is often not seen as something that's important. And the reason why it's good to incorporate in the existing quality improvement assurance is that it makes things a bit easier for people. It's like, what do? I don't know where to start. So basically, all you got to do is start thinking from a sustainability point of view. And that also means environmental and also financial, which oftentimes go together, thankfully, without compromising on patient safety. Because the other argument I hear is like, oh, patient safety is first and foremost. And, that's always been true. And, even with my initiative, I'm not saying we should, sacrifice on patient safety to do that. So by adding it into the overall picture, then you can start to do audits and make changes at the same time thinking about sustainability and patient safety. So it's basically a school of thought and a system. And there's online things you can read about. It started in the UK, and again, with a lot of the hospitals trying to get to net zero, we're trying to incorporate that into our main system and quality assurance process. So, my fellowship at Darwin last year for 6 months was actually called Quality, Safety, and Sustainability Fellowship. And I think, there's oftentimes we feel like a bit of a conflict between infection control and other things like that, but we should all work together to try to come to the same outcome of having the best possible care. At the same time, also providing an efficient and environmental and financially savvy care.
Yeah, I love that.
So that's the idea of SOSGI. Yeah.
Well, so you got to hear the equation: sustainable value equals outcomes for patients and populations. And that really is individual care, but also population health. So that's great. That's absolutely what we've always been taught is important from, early med school days throughout. But just at the bottom line of that equation, the triple bottom line being environmental importance, social and financial impacts.
That's right. And call it the triple bottom line. Instead of social financial impacts, now we think environmental, social, financial. Because like you said, if you do make the planet better, it will be better for the population as a whole.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Hey, so Maro, I think we've covered pretty much everything we need to cover. It's been about an hour. Is there anything else you wanted to add?
I think stay strong. It's often can be very discouraging and very frustrating. But just know, have that grander sense of purpose and fulfillment. Why save one person when you can save the planet and humanity? The other thing is, being involved. The more interested you are, you're only going to progress in that direction, and also you'll get the forefront because healthcare sustainability, it's exploding right now. It's coming up in anesthetic exams now, interview questions, and it's fairly still a small network, so you can reach quote unquote high level people and fame quickly. So it's really good for your CV building. So you're doing a good deed while also helping your career. And the other thing is, because even though it feels like a small change, it's all compounding and it'll have a massive effect. So like when I was in London for 6 months for a fellowship, and they had these little mini Cortex prep sticks for cannulas. It's like those things that you crack open for the spinal, except it was like a 1 mil version. And then basically that was one of the projects that I tried to change and introduce wipes again. And there's so many meetings with infection control, vascular access team, but it actually finally went through only a few months ago. So, it does take time to change, so don't be discouraged. And just remember, if you're not doing it for yourself, you're doing it for the system. And if you hand over the system to someone else, they'll continue it. Anyway, I think that was a project to save like over £30,000 a year from that, just a simple change. So, it doesn't sound like a big deal, but because we're using so much of it, you will actually have massive impact. And how good does it sound on the CV? Saving $65,000 for the hospital a year just based on one change. So don't be discouraged. Things will take time. You're doing a good deed, and keep at it.
That's such a great thought. That this is the point of low-level fruit. It's like imagine someone's just discovered penicillin, and you're trying to launch penicillin for hospitals. Imagine you were in that time, or in the time of they've just discovered vaccinations, and now you've got the opportunity in the hospital to start vaccinating all your patients from whatever. This is that. Is this that moment where?
Look, just because penicillin is such a huge change, I would like to say this, but let's say this because I want people to be inspired. Yeah, and it is a climate emergency, and the reality is, climate change is happening, and it's only going to get worse, but every 0.1 degrees count. So don't be discouraged. 1.5 degrees, I'm sure we're going to go over it realistically, but just because 2 degrees is going to be much more worse than 1.5, 2.2 is going to be much more worse than 2 degrees, and things like that. So every little bit counts. So, this is, like I say, this is the time to be involved. It is a climate emergency, and we should all be doing our part. And, a lot of people say, oh, it's the New South Wales Health, it's Queensland Health, Northern Territory Health, and it's not a necessarily statewide thing, it's a hospital thing. And it's funny because when I was doing stuff in UK, and then I try to bring some stuff to Darwin Hospital, and this common thing you hear is like, oh no, the UK is way ahead, or this is Northern Territory, or it's not a Northern Territory, it's not a Northern Territory problem, it's a hospital problem, and we can definitely solve it if we have the willpower. And I was like, when I was in UK, I mean, there was no sustainability meetings happening, and I basically restarted the sustainability theatre-wide meetings there. And it wasn't because they were UK, it's because we had a group of people who were interested and want to be involved and enthusiastic, and we managed to get a lot of change done. So, we should get out of this mindset of blaming upper and upper. Change needs to come top down, but also ground up, grassroots movement, and we have to meet in the middle, and I believe we can do it.
Excellent. Hey, that's a great thing to end on. So again, just a plug for Doctors for the Environment Australia. Please look at their website, sign up, contribute, whatever you can do, and also Future Anesthesia. So please subscribe. We'll try to promote all good information in the space. People like Forbes McGay and Eugene Kayak, and also you, Maro, whatever you want to promote, we're happy to do that as well. And if you want to volunteer for any of this stuff, please contact me at abcsanesthesia@gmail.com. Thanks so much for your time, Maro. It's great to chat to you on this Saturday.
Yeah, thanks, Lou. See you next time.
See you next time. Now, what's new with ABCs of Anesthesia is that we're forming a whole bunch of very comprehensive courses for every stage of your anesthetic journey, from medical student to procedural skills, from foundations in anesthesia, as well as really important exam lectures and clinical anesthesia courses as well.